On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Opera Box Score.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. It is Opera Box Score. I'm your host, George Cedarquist. It's just me this week, the OBS crew, on that much-needed fortnight off. We have really great things in store on the show for you in 2022. Episode 300, depending on when you're counting, is potentially right now. I think we're going to celebrate that in the new year with the whole team. Some great guests lined up for 2022. Some crossover shows, stuff you do not want to miss. But first, this week, it is part 2 of our favorite things, looking back at 2021 and our favorite episodes, including Barbara Hannigan, Will Liverman, and that contentious Euro 2020 bracket. Email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. All you do is drop us a line, and then you get an OBS beer coaster, and you get an OBS lapel pin just for sharing your hot take. A little bit of sports before we get going. We've talked about it before on the show, but depending on what happens on New Year's Eve, if Alabama wins and if Michigan wins, they are on a collision course to meet in the national championship. I hope I'm not putting the cart before the horse here. As a huge Wolverine fan, nothing would give me greater pleasure than to make it and win the national championship. I'm sure Weston's Alabama Crimson Tide are going to stand in the way. He said to me, well, I know the Crimson Tide will be there, George. I don't know if the Wolverines will be there. We'll keep an eye on that. Problems in the NHL, of course. They have withdrawn from the 2022 Olympics. The NHL regular season is a complete mess right now. NBA season is rocking as well. In fact, I think the NFL is perhaps the only major league sport that is actually continuing full steam. There's even a lockout in Major League Baseball. Lots of problems everywhere. We move on. Let's talk some opera.
Huddle up. Let's go inside the huddle.
In May of 2021, Barbara Hannigan went inside the huddle with Weston and Oliver to give her take on the post-pandemic Singer's Playbook. She introduced her young artist initiative called Momentum, and she made a great argument as to why streaming is here to stay.
I was sitting in Hamburg in my pajamas with a glass of wine between Lulu shows, just chewing the fat with a friend of mine. And I was watching the Grammys online, you know, because obviously I couldn't go. I had a show, I think, maybe the next day or the day after. Anyway, or rehearsal, I don't know. And I was just sitting there. And I said to my friend, oh, just be quiet for a second. They're doing my category. I just have to see. And I never thought that I would win. I just felt that I should see who did win. And then I was like, no, I couldn't believe that RCD won. That was a big shocker.
And did you have to accept the speech online or something?
There was no, the funny thing about it was that there is a photo floating around of someone who has blonde hair holding a Grammy, who is not me, and it's Getty Images has it, and it's somebody I've never seen in my life. and it's holding the Grammy. It says Barbara Hannigan with her Grammy, but I wasn't there. Just Google Barbara Hannigan Grammy, and you will find a picture of a blonde woman in a long black dress holding a Grammy, and it will say that it's me.
Well, we are already talking about Crazy Girl Crazy, which has Barrio, Gershwin, and I forget the last.
Berg.
And
Alban
Berg.
Berg.
Okay, just
Killer
the
combination.
The three things you always want to put together, and one of those pieces is completely a cappella. Right? The sequenza or something like that. Yeah.
Barrio Sequenza 3. So he wrote all these sequences for solo instruments, and the third one he wrote for solo voice. He wrote it for his ex-wife, who was an amazing American Armenian singer named Kathy Berberian. And it's just a crazy piece with symbols. It's like a graphic score. And so graphic score means that it's not like there are a few notes in it, but there's also like all these symbols. It's like hieroglyphics almost that you have to figure out and perform, like tongue clicks and laughing and coughing and gasping and it's a really crazy piece about a woman who's trying to find her place in the world, really. And I thought it would fit really well on the CD because the CD is it's kind of about a woman, and it's about a kind of madness, but crazy also can be a positive word if something's crazy, or if I'm crazy about you or something, it has positive connotations. So I was looking at like women and craziness and madness and risks and all that kind of stuff on the CD.
I love it. I often make this like little comparison. Like I have a friend who sight reads music like ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
You might have met her, Catherine Dane.
No, I think I've heard her name.
She's in the Netherlands. Anyway, she's the type of singer.
Oh yeah, Catherine Dane. Sorry. Yeah. Of course I know Catherine. Yeah. She's amazing.
Where you can throw spaghetti and meatballs on the wall, and if it sticks to the wall, she can read it as music.
She's amazing. Yeah, I recommended her once for something because Reinbert DeLeo, the conductor I often recorded with and performed with many, many times, and I forget where I was, in Munich or I don't know, somewhere. And he called me up and said, I have a concert next week and the singer's gotten sick. Can you recommend anyone? And I recommended Catherine, and she did it, and she was fantastic.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
Yeah.
So when choosing repertoire, I mean, we already learned now the concept behind Crazy Girl Crazy, but just in general, what are your kind of standards and goals with repertoire choice, especially when you're both conducting and singing?
Well, I think the first thing is to say that pretty well all my choices come from the gut. I mean, instinct, absolutely. It's not intellectual choices at all. It's not that I'm fascinated by analyzing such and such a work and figuring out whether the form is retrograde or retrograde inversion, etc. Totally not interested. I mean, I'm interested in that maybe later, but what's my gut feeling about the piece? And do I want to sink my teeth into it? And do I want to live with it? And do I want to love it? Because it's like a relationship, a piece of music. So is it something I want to spend time with? Is it something I want to have a drink with? I
want to have a drink with that sequenza.
Or like, would it go well with my morning cup of tea? And then the next thing is that I like to put repertoire together on programs that make emotional dramaturgical sense to me. That means there has to be a kind of through line that connects everything, and it doesn't need to be a linear story, and it can even be contradictory, but somehow it has to make sense for me, that that everything has to be interconnected. And so I choose very varied repertoire. I love old music. I love new music. I just did the craziest improvisation with live electronics on a Rameau aria. And,
Which Rameau aria? I'm crazy about Rameau.
Tristes après,
Castor Pollux, yeah.
And so, I love to mix things up, but there has to be, for me, some kind of interconnectedness with everything, and it has to be really something that I feel I can incorporate in my system.
You
Can
have
I
some,
just? Okay.
sorry. I was just wanted to ask. You always seem to have such a personal connection to everything that you do, which is so exciting to me as an artist. Just seeing an example of someone doing that and doing it successfully. Do you ever like see something like what are your limits basically? What is something that you'll see and like maybe it's out of your range, or maybe you're like, I'm not sure if I can conduct and sing that at the same time. Like how do you negotiate those limits with this really boundless self-expression that you are so known for?
Well, there are some pieces that lend themselves very well to singing and conducting, and there are other pieces which don't make any sense. Like I
Mhm.
could do it, but it wouldn't make sense.
Mm.
Um, maybe some of your listeners know this extraordinary piece by Samuel Barber called Knoxville, summer of
We
1915.
talk about it all the time, actually.
That piece.
Yeah.
And I ended up singing and conducting it. I was only supposed to sing it, actually, with London Symphony in March, but I ended up singing it and conducting it on one day's notice, which was really, I knew that it would work very well for the piece because the piece is about conjuring collective memory. So to stand and face the orchestra and sing it, and we didn't have a public, so it was possible to face the orchestra. I mean, that just was like absolutely 100% that works.
Mm.
But I feel that I suppose I'm in quite a luxury position, but I also have to take credit maybe for having created that luxury position, in saying that I really choose carefully what I do, what repertoire I do, and with whom. And that's like, I don't, if I get offered something, I say, who are the other singers? Who's the director? Who's the conductor? If it's an opera, or if I'm invited to a festival, I want to know who the other people are that's going to be there. I want to know what kind of programming they have, what kind of audiences they have. Like, I'm really selective. And I suppose, maybe that strange path comes from the fact that at the beginning of my career, I was doing like the most obscure contemporary music, like really hardcore, strange stuff. Like I've even, you know, microtonal, like crazy microtonal improvisational material. And sometimes in the audience, we literally had like 7 people, and
And they
I
were
would,
all me.
and I mean, so in a way, like you build up your resilience because you're staying true to what you feel is important. It's not about selling tickets. It's not about, I mean, I was performing a lot of these things, for example, in Holland, where the government was funding concerts. And so they could afford to do a concert where you
Right.
didn't make any ticket sales. That's not the case in the States, for sure. Um, but I think so. I mean, in a way, that was like a hard knock because it's not very fun to walk out on stage and see that nobody's there. On the other hand, I was performing music I really believed in. And what happened over time is that audiences started to get larger and started to trust me. And I always say to young artists, this whole business is based on trust and relationship. Trusting the music, trusting the composer, trusting the presenter, trusting your colleagues, having a relationship with those people. It's not about your agent having a relationship with those people. It's about you. And so over the years, building trust and relationship, also with audiences, finding myself finally performing the most contemporary music to full houses at the Munich State Opera or at Paris Opera, whatever, but it's been a long road. I'm going to be 50 in a week and a day. So on May 8th, yeah, a week and 2 days.
Happy early birthday.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I'm totally answering your question, but I guess for me, it's been a very interesting path. I didn't have major management, not even remotely major management, until I was 40. So I was
Really?
doing, yeah.
Wow.
So I was doing pretty well everything myself. I learned a lot about, again, the trust and relationship. I mean, I was dealing directly with people. The Berlin Philharmonic called me on the phone. the first time they wanted me to work with them. Conductors were calling me directly. So that was very cool, because you just talk, you're just talking shop directly instead of agent to agent or management to management. And for me, that's really, the personal interaction is, again, same with the repertoire. There has to be an interconnectedness,
So just go back briefly to the first part of the repertoire, and then it's a great place to pivot. I just want to say that I have some friends, and I'm sure there are a lot of people out there listening right now, who trust your taste in repertoire so much that whenever a new recording comes out, we just talk about like, oh, I've got the new Barbara Hannigan. I'm listening to the new Barbara Hannigan, Not even talking about composers anymore, just talking about you.
But, that I find really wonderful, because I realized at a certain point that because I had the trust of the listener, I could say, hey, why don't you listen to this? Why don't you try listening to this? Why don't we put these things together, and let's all, I'm really curious what people will think when we put, Barrio, Berg, and Gershwin together, or when I put Rameau and this obscure composer named Petrassi and then Hindemith together, which I did like a month ago in X, like really as one unit, one piece with a flow, with no applause in between. And like, people go with it. Audiences are curious, and if you invite them to be curious and to be participating in the event with you, witnessing the event with you, it comes back to that trust. And I also was really lucky that I worked with Winter and Winter label, and now the main part of my albums have been with Alpha. And Alpha. Yeah, me too. They're so amazing, because I just say, oh, why don't we do a Messiaen CD? Great. Why don't we do the Vienna CD? I mean, that's pretty obscure repertoire of early Webern and Zemlinsky. Yeah, but I mean, they're so into all the things I'm doing. Why don't I put Grisey together with Haydn and No? Like, let's do that triptych. And they're like, thumbs up, And so the support is amazing. But I don't think that would have happened. I remember like trying, when I was in my 20s, I remember trying to get stuff that I had done that had already been recorded, in live in concert, and it was a really good quality. I couldn't get it put out on a CD to save my life. So it's been a long game for me, absolutely long game, which is fine. I have no problem with that, but it's interesting,
Well, we touched briefly upon you as a young artist transitioning into your professional self, and now we know your age, which I'm shocked that I heard that.
Thank
but
you. Good answer.
We can bleep it out if you want.
No, it's gonna be. I'm advertising it. So.
But I first became aware of you through one of our interview guests, Douglas Williams, who was one of your Equilibrium Young Artist Fellows. And can you talk about the transition between the young artist training to the professional career, and how that space is like a lonely space and a difficult space?
Yeah, well, around 2016-17, when I started to get into a position where I realized I had some clout, I thought, okay, well, then I need to start paying it forward. And how am I going to do that? And I thought, okay, I could go and, be a regular person at a conservatory and do master classes, which I do to a certain extent. I mean, I go to Juilliard regularly and University of Toronto and some other places. But I thought, that's not really where I'm needed. Where am I needed? And I thought the loneliest time, the most isolated time of a young artist's career is when or of any artist's career, I think, is when they're starting out. And all of a sudden you're professional. You've done all your YAPs, your young artist programs, and all of a sudden you're out there on the road and you're supposed to know everything, and you know nothing, and you don't know anyone. You have a few people. And that period of, I think it's about 7 years, when every cent you make is basically going back into coaching, training, and prepping, because everything you do is new. You're on the road alone. You're taking every possible gig you can. And so I decided to create this initiative, which was really for young professionals. It was for young professional artists in the first substantial phase of their career. I didn't want to put an age limit on it. I said, what does the first substantial phase mean? About the first 7 years of your career. Because I figured, like, what I've seen in my life is that if an artist makes it through those first 7 years, usually they'll stick around. But if the first 7 years are too tough, then we lose a lot of artists into something
I was
else.
just telling Weston that I know
Yeah.
people who completed some of the most prestigious, finishing programs, and then they just disappear.
And then they just disappeared. Yeah. And so I just thought that's maybe where I can be a helping hand, because I know a lot of people. I do all my own programming. I don't like orchestras don't call me up and say, would you like to come and conduct this? No, they just say, would you like to come? And I say, yes. And this is what I would like to do. So I'm in a position where I can program. And because I have the trust of orchestras and companies and managements and so on, I can say, and I'd like to invite this and this and this person who you've never heard of. And they'll say, okay. So that's what I decided to do, was to start Equilibrium. And I wanted to find who was out there, who was interesting, who was curious, who was kind of, people that had something different about them. Not just like a special skill, but like that had a high capacity for discipline and hard work, that were curious, had to have good voices, high level of musicianship, good technique, the possibility really to have a serious career, but we're still maybe could use a helping hand. And so I started EQ, and by now, I started with a production of The Rake's Progress, which I was triple casting, and I was going to do it with four different orchestras maybe, which I did. And we also made a film of it, and a documentary was made. So that was like the first project. And I didn't have any funding, by the way. So so that was kind of crazy. So then, and I was like, well, of course I'll sink some of my own savings into it, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it. But then I applied to one foundation, the Luzern Art Mentor Foundation, and they gave us some money just when I really needed it, which was amazing. And then I won a prize in Sweden, the Rolf Schock Prize. And it's a prize from he was a mathematician, kind of physicist expert, and he had a prize that went out to 4 people. One was in the arts, and the other 3 were in math and sciences. And I got that prize, and it gave me enough money to get the thing going in the first year. And so that was amazing. So I had auditions. I heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications, I think from like 42 countries. I watched everything online. I read their letters. I looked at their CVs. I watched their videos. And then I invited musicians to come, the singers, in person to different cities and to do auditions. And that's how I met Doug Williams, for example. I'd heard about him, so I already was pretty interested in him.
So am I.
Oh, he's such a phenomenal artist. I mean, the
I
guy,
love him. I know he knows that I love him, but like I
he-
really love him. So
yeah, super talent, and I mean, with the voice that he has, which is such a rich bass baritone instrument, and combined with his curiosity, his high level of musicianship, and his ability and interest in the contemporary repertoire as well as the traditional repertoire.
and
That's
poetry and dancing.
and poetry and dancing. It's just, and just he's a real humanist, So so that's, I mean, it's kind of like people like Doug that I ended up choosing for Equilibrium, and we're now, what is it now, 2021. So, and we actually had a season this year. It was crazy, like in the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, like Pulcinella became our pandemic piece, and we did it I had a team in Switzerland. I have a team, including Doug, coming up at the Paris Philharmonie. I was with Munich Philharmonic, also with Doug. I created opportunities I did an Equilibrium engagement, like the show that's going to be broadcast tomorrow night, April 30th. Also, a young artist who auditioned for Equilibrium. So I've been keeping the dream alive. And it's really, it's an initiative where I bring the younger artists into the highest level of performance with the orchestras and ensembles with whom I work, but I'm also we also have guests come in and talk to us. And I love this. Like, I love Q&As. I always learn so much. Kind of like podcasts, I just love podcasts. And so we have people like Daniel Harding, Natalie Dessay, Laurent Naouri, Didier Martin, the head of Alpha. We've had social media experts coming in. We've had, mental health experts coming in. We've had all kinds of people that come in and speak to the young artists about their paths. Composers, Casper Holton, the former
Any
head
athletes come in?
Well, Jackie Reardon was like, she's kind of part of EQ, and Jackie's a former professional tennis player who started this whole mindset, Friendly Eyes kind of initiative, which is all about mental focus and discipline, basically. And so there have been athletes who are connected to EQ people because of our connection to Olympic athletes through Jackie. If you ask me the same question in about a month, I'll have a different answer for you.
You have Roger Federer coming in?
Oh, that would be cool. No, I don't have a plan for Roger Federer. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan. That guy is classy, really classy.
Right now, I've got my eyes on Stefanos Tsitsipas.
Oh,
First,
okay.
because I love his name, but also, I mean,
it sounds like
come on.
Sounds like the tsetse fly. Yeah.
So obviously you're providing a lot of resources, even as you said, during the pandemic. And I feel like at this point, it almost feels like a cliche to talk about what the world of the arts is going to look like after the pandemic. But I thought you might have because you're already such an original sort of figure in the operatic pantheon, if you will. And I was just wondering, how do you think artists can and should move forward to create a new post-pandemic normal, especially when it comes to like momentum or just your general thoughts in abstract?
Okay, well, maybe I'll leave momentum for maybe my second part of my answer, and I'll start with a few things. I think that we have to accept that streaming is here to stay. And if you like it or you don't like it, you've got to accept it. That some concert halls had streaming, like Berlin Phil and Gothenburg Symphony. It was normal for the concerts to be streamed. Other places like the radio orchestras, they're always going out on the radio and occasionally had video coverage. But I think we have to accept now that it's here. And it's difficult for any artists. I mean, I've talked to many artists that are, not young artists anymore about how tough they find the streamings because the audience isn't there, and that they really get their energy from the audience. I also, what I find the most difficult is singing when there is an audience and it's also being streamed. So say you've got a half a size audience, or some places I played 1,800 seat hall in November for 50 people, and we did the show 6 times, and it was for radio, and that was super tough because I wanted to sing for the radio mic, but there's 50 people spread out over this huge hall, and if they don't hear me, I also feel so. And you sing very differently, you perform very differently. It's like film acting versus theater acting. So and it's the same with streaming. Like, I actually started to really enjoy the streamings as long as there was no audience there. If I could do a streaming, like a recording session with beautiful light, and I just thought, this is a really beautiful recording session, and we're all dressed up and we look fabulous, and I'm singing for the mic, then it was okay. But I think this is something that artists are really going to have to navigate, because it's not only the fact that it's being streamed, it's the fact that it's staying out there.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
not just your one night concert where you didn't feel at your best. You can't forget about it because everybody keeps watching it for the next 30 days, 6 months, 5 years, and it's very hard to negotiate rights to say it can't stay up, or I get approval. I mean, artist approval. I mean, even me at the age I'm at, artist approval is really hard to sort out, and I can't imagine what it's like for young artists that don't have the power that the older artists have.
I just think of like the Mets, you know, every night since the beginning of the pandemic, just putting out another stream in their library. And I can't imagine like what the legal loopholes must be that they're exploiting to do that. But it is very much a concern. And especially when you, for someone like you who is creating something so personal, I wonder, have you ever run into anything like that where you've not wanted them to put something out?
Well, actually, no, I've been pretty supportive of everything going out. I just also, maybe because I'm from Waverly, Nova Scotia, and much of my family and friends, they still live in Nova Scotia. They're not going to get to Paris Opera. They're not going to get to Munich. So I like that my family can, you know, if the internet's working that day, that they can watch the stuff I'm doing. So
as an Alabama native, I really feel that.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it's really amazing. And I'm such a fan of radio. And I've been, I mean, pretty well, I would say a lot of what I did since I was 19 years old was on radio because I was doing world premieres. So I'm used to being like out there. And I feel that the idea of traveling is going to change. And this hopping overseas back and forth and you know, I think that's probably going to change in the next while. I have friends in the airline industry. I also have friends in the climate change movement. And I know that both are suffering for very different reasons. But I think that we're going to see touring change considerably. And I personally am much less eager. I mean, I never liked being on airplanes very much anyway, because I mean, sometimes I could maybe watch a movie that was nice or catch up on some reading, but otherwise I find it very, very stressful going through customs and going overseas back and forth and the jet lag and so on. So, but I think it's really going to change. I think financially there's going to be less money. And people are going to be more interested in having artists come for 2 or 3 weeks than coming for 1 week at a time. And I'm noticing that already in my calendar in future seasons, that people want you to come for a residency. And I do too, you know, as long as I can find someone to look after my cats. Like I'm happy to
volunteering
go somewhere.
as tribute.
Oh, really?
Well, we'll take care of your cats for you.
July of 2021 was when the Euro 2020 European Football Championships were played, of course postponed a year because of COVID-19. We took the final 4 teams and put them in a bracket replicating Euro 2020 and had our special guest Maestro Anthony Barrese to pick a winner based on the opera prowess of the remaining 4 countries. The matchups were England, represented by Weston, against Denmark, represented by myself. And the winner of that played the winner of Italy, represented by Matt, and Spain, represented by Oliver. Of course, we know in reality, England would lose on penalties to Italy. The 3 Lions did so well, and this England fan, so proud of how far they went. The results of the opera Euro 2020 championships, that's right now.
When I initially picked England, I thought George was going to be judging this instead of Anthony. So I feel like I might be at more of a disadvantage than I initially thought, but that's okay. So England is maybe not the first country that springs to mind when you're thinking about opera, right? I feel like people tend to gravitate towards your Germanys, your Frances, your Englands.
Definitely start with an apology. That's
the way to go. But that's the thing, though, is that there's no need for England to apologize, because once you start looking at these stats, you're like, oh, wait, this is kind of a little superpower in and of itself. I was looking at a bunch of stats. These are all my stats are from operabase.com. This is I decided to look at the 2018-2019 season because obviously I don't want to count anything from the pandemic because all bets are off there. And Great Britain had the 6th most operas performed in the world, which is pretty impressive.
Not even top 5.
Well, but it beats out France and Spain completely. While it's not number one, it definitely is punching above its weight class, especially for a country that had a bit of a operatic dry spell between Handel and Benjamin Britten, but
a short stretch of music.
A little short stretch.
Gilbert and Sullivan, if you please.
But you have to remember too that in the 2018-2019 season, London had the most operas performed than any other individual city in the world. London. And it was a second in the number of productions compared to Moscow, I believe, which is pretty impressive. There are over 430 opera companies in the US, in the UK, according to Opera Base, which is very impressive. There are, and then if you look at another list of top composers, in terms of the 2018-2019 season, Handel saw 511 performances, which is 9th place out of 10. But you also have to remember that Handel is the only Baroque composer on that list. It's all 19th century basic composers, and Mozart. Like, what is that? But Handel is like holding on not just like England, but like the Baroque period entirely, which I think is pretty cool. England is also one of the home to a lot of, I think, very offbeat composers. If you look at some of their offerings, you have like Ethel Smith, probably the most famous female composer of the past, 300-400 years, honestly. Benjamin Britten, of course, single-handedly revitalized British opera, and I think arguably was, instrumental in modern styles of opera. I would also mention that, if you go way, way back, you've got like Purcell, England getting at the ground floor, really, really solid stuff. And while maybe they don't have necessarily like the breadth of like Italy in terms of like all of the great like warhorse composers, they are a powerhouse in terms of contemporary composers. I would argue that there are more relevant 20th century and 21st century English composers than there are from any other country on this list. I mean, you look at Peter Maxwell Davies, Thomas Addis, George Benjamin are some favorites of mine. I mean, these are all big heavy hitters in the contemporary opera world, and a couple of those are still alive, which is a nice bonus. In terms of singers, you've got quintessentially British voices like Peter Pears, Ian Bostridge, Janet Baker, Kathleen Ferrier, John Tomlinson, Alice Coote, Sarah Connolly. They all have very British voices and a very specific sense of drama that you don't necessarily see with a lot of singers from other countries, in my opinion. And I would also be remiss, as far as singing goes, to mention countertenor Alfred Deller, who paved the way for the modern countertenor. And I think that because of through Alfred Deller, we have one of the most important developments in vocal technique coming from England that is now a quintessential part of historic period practice. They basically invented a new voice type, which is not something that I think you can really say out of any of the other countries here. And for that reason, even though it might be a little bit of an underdog at first glance, I think England has a pretty good shot of winning it all this year in soccer.
Wow, you put your best foot forward there, Weston. Good effort. I like it. All right, let's get real now, okay? Let's talk about Denmark. Side note, I'm happy to cheer on Denmark as an England fan just for today. Once we meet on the pitch for the Euros, all bets are off. All right, Carlsberg beer, one of those delicious Danish beers. Its old advertising slogan was Carlsberg, probably the best lager in the world. When you comes to opera, I think the same thing applies. Denmark, probably the most underrated opera country in the world. Copenhagen, it's just plain cool. It's the place to be. Let's talk opera houses. I'm going to leave everything on the floor. I'm not saving anything for the next game. What a rookie mistake you made, Weston.
Because he won't make it past the first round.
All right, we got two big opera houses. The Royal Danish Opera, led by John Fulljames, and the Danish National Opera. Those are both in Copenhagen. And actually, the Copenhagen Opera House looks remarkably like Jabba's sail barge, which is really beautifully done. They dropped.
Did you mean that as a point for or against?
That's my question.
$370 million to build that in 2000. All right, here's the stat that matters. Is this? There are 36 opera companies in Denmark. That is for a country of 6 million people per capita. That blows all these competitors out of the water. That shows the importance of this art form to this nation. Let's look at the composers. Edvard Grieg, Carl Nielsen, Paul Ruders, who just wrote Handmaid's Tale. Even Louis
Edvard Grieg?
Even Louis Andriessen is still alive.
What's a good Grieg opera?
I'm not going to get into specifics here. I don't have the time for that. All right. And look, this just in. Kaya Sarajevo's Innocence, coming up next season at the Met, mind you, was commissioned by the Danish National Opera. We've got writers, stories from the likes of Hans Christian Andersen. We've got voices like baritone Bo Skovhus and tenor Lauritz Melchior, and directors like Kasper Holten, who cut his teeth in Denmark and then would go and run the Royal Opera House. So are these household names? No, they're not. But in the Euro 2020 competition, Ukraine, it wasn't a household name. Switzerland, that wasn't a household name either. But boy, this roster of singers, writers, directors, composers, houses is so unique, and it deserves to go to the final. Bereze, make your call.
This is tougher than I thought it would be.
You got to take off points for Edvard Grieg because he was Norwegian.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Well, I also don't know of any operas that he wrote.
That's fine. That's fine.
That too.
But
Double
hey,
points.
look, IKEA, okay? IKEA.
That's Swedish.
When you said Sarajevo, it's like she's not. But you made the point that, I mean,
she's Finnish, isn't she? Sarajevo?
He's Finnish,
but
yes.
he said it was commissioned by the.
Yes.
He's playing this pan-Scandinavian league over here.
I mean, man, this is tough. This is really tough. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with England simply because it's just got a longer history. I don't know. I'm sorry, George, but you made some compelling arguments, but then you also made some serious mistakes. It was a really tough choice, though.
It's okay. It's still a moral victory for you, George.
Moving over to the other half of the bracket, then, this is Matt's Italy, who's going to go first against Oliver's Spain.
I got to go first. I don't even know what kind of argument I'm going to counter, but luckily we got a powerhouse on our hands, because literally how much time do you have to talk about the people who invented opera as it is today? First recorded operas were performed in these ducal palaces in Italy, and that has grown into a cottage industry with these major houses like La Scala, arguably the Mount Everest of performing an opera, and definitely the Mount Everest of getting applauded for performing an opera. You've got Teatro La Fenice, which has both cultural significance as an opera house named the Phoenix that has burned down not once but twice, and was featured in major opera movies like A Night at the Opera and the Luchino Visconti, who also was an opera director. His film Senso. Teatro San Carlo, the oldest continually active opera venue in the world, in Naples, and basically the template for all for most of these royal opera houses that these jokers are talking about. That's not even counting the Arena di Verona. I could go on for literally 2 hours just listing opera houses in Italy, not even talking about operas that were set there or composers. Let's talk composers. Weston had, we've already seen the hand there in England. In Italy, you get in from the ground floor. You've got Monteverdi, Cavalli going all the way through the bel canto era to Verdi and Puccini, the bread and butter of your operatic repertoire today. Of the top 10 most performed composers from those 2018-19 stats, you had Verdi in first, Puccini in third, Rossini in fourth, and Donizetti in sixth. Just those four composers.
Who was second?
Second was,
I believe it was Mozart, as I recall.
Godot Mozart.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just those four composers is a total of over 3,000 performances. Singers, again, how much time do you have? You've got the historical singers like Francesco Cuzzoni, Farinelli, Luisa Tetrazzini, like all people who are on the vanguard of technical advancement in opera and whose names we still talk about in terms of teaching opera history because they were just that important to the art form. And then legendary singers within memory. I mean, you've got Pavarotti, you've got two Renatas, both Scotto and Tebaldi, two Titos, both
Two
Stipa
old
and
Renatas.
Gobi. And that doesn't even count Totti Del Monte. You know, I could go on, and I probably will, because this is going to be a blowout.
All right. Matt Cummings going to save something for the potentially inevitable second round here, but Oliver Spain.
Well, Italy
the
may
counter
have
attack.
all of that, may bring that much muscle to the game, but where's the romance? I mean, if you took away Spain, you would not have Carmen. You would not have Don Giovanni. You wouldn't have Barbara Seville or Marriage of Figaro or Trovatore or Don Carlos or Forza del Destino.
Yeah,
or
who
everybody.
wrote all those operas?
But he needed a place. What about Don Quixote? What about Elixir of Love? Did you know that was set in Spain? And
Basque
Pablita.
region, but yeah.
So
Yeah, depends on who you ask.
Yeah.
so many composers, namely Italian ones, wanted to be Spanish. They wanted to set their operas in a place that the audience immediately identified and understood what it meant to be Spanish, because that's how important Spain is to Europe. And we're talking about singers. I mean, if you did not have Manuel Garcia, you wouldn't have Maria Malibran. So none of your Rossini operas would have a star, or Pauline Viardot for all of those great French operas. And she composed herself, Pauline Viardot, even though she wasn't born in Spain. She comes from Spain. And then there's only one, non-desirable singer, Placid Sunday, but we have some really nice ones. Like Montserrat Caballé,
Hall of Famer, got to give her credit.
Alfredo Kraus, Teresa Berganza, Pilar Lorengar, Jose Carreras. Spain just brings so much to the table. We have some opera houses too. 3 that are, considered to be international level European houses: the Bilbao, the Madrid Real, and the Gran Liceo in Barcelona. And we have a stage director that everybody wants a piece of, Calixto Bieto. Italy may have the history, but Spain has shown throughout time that it's always a place that composers want to go, that singers come from, and where weird ass directors get their start.
Crazy name, crazy guy, Calixto Bieto. So Oliver makes the case for Spain, throwing it back to our guest,
Place.
Marty Baresi,
It's the place
to judge Italy and Spain. We're looking at the entire body of work here. Opera set in that country, the opera houses, the composers, the number of performances, the prominence of the singers. Which country has
Spanish composers? We don't really got them. We have that Zarzuela stuff.
But
and there's
settings.
I'm reminded of the first time that Michael Jordan was allowed to play basketball in the Olympics, and was basically cleaning his fingernails while playing the Russian team, and it was a bit of a turkey shape. So I can't in any, despite my preconceived notions, I just think this is such an unfair. If this, I don't even know why I know you put Italy in this, but it's like having a pyramid contest with Egypt versus like everybody else. So it's with I don't know, with no regrets, this one goes to Italy.
Puta madre.
I'm shocked. Absolutely shocked.
Into the final. Weston's England, you're going to go first, Weston, against Matt's Italy, the final. Here we go. Make your case.
Well, I think the first thing I want to say is that I know Matt's going to come up right after me and just hit me with the rest of those statistics, which is going to hurt a little bit. But the reason I named pretty much all of my statistics in the first round is because I think the real core of what makes England an operatic superpower is a little bit more ineffable than that. First of all, one thing we haven't mentioned, especially when you're talking about, say, like Verdi and stuff, Verdi was heavily, heavily inspired by Shakespeare. And I mean, you're not going to have 60% of Verdi without Shakespeare, at least not as effectively,
Yeah, and it would be really tough if you had like one of your prime operatic composers of a country being heavily influenced by your opponent. Like,
it's true.
George Friedrich Handel, for instance, you would never want that to be brought
Well, you'd
up
also have
at
to
all.
remember that, Handel, while he did do time in Italy, there's also the German component as well.
I was gonna say,
we're just
wasn't he German?
famous
Like-
primarily for his German music. Sure.
Anyway, I do think we have to point out that Shakespeare has his fingerprints all over the European continent. Every single time someone is going to talk about something that is dramatic at its core, they're going to refer to it as their country's version of Shakespeare. Italy is a vocal powerhouse. You've got all the bel canto that you could ever want. You've got your Puccini, you've got your sopranos. But I think we can, and this might be a controversial statement for Anthony specifically, but I think once you get to, the mid 20th century, things start to diverge a little bit in opera. You have the vocal pyrotechnics, the old-fashioned Italian style, and then you have the more dramatic, more grounded, perhaps more relevant, I would argue, as the England supporter, style of opera that really finds its home in England and places like Germany. I would say that, you might go to an Italian opera and hear some very impressive runs and trills, but once you hit the 1950s, there's not that many relevant Italian composers out there, I would say. I mean, I think that, you look at someone like Thomas Addis is much more of a force than any living Italian composer because of the way he writes, the way he speaks to the contemporary people. I think that modern Italian composers are not heard that much outside of Italy, whereas England is in its flowering. Italy had its flowering maybe 400 years ago, and who knows, they might have won every single competition up to this point. But I think that England, if you take into account the drama, the relevance, and the more adventurous nature of what it is currently producing, has a better shot of defeating them here in 2021/2020 because of the pandemic.
Weston Williams using some substitutions and some 20th century trickery to try and one up Matt's Italy. Matt's, what's the second half going to look like for you?
Yeah, you may have tried to kneecap Verdi, but interestingly, Shakespeare himself, a lot of the roots of stories like Romeo and Juliet come back to Italy themselves. Every version of Romeo and Juliet set in where? Fair Verona, where we play our scene. So did he really write it so much as steal from the Italians?
Somewhere. Yeah, right.
Yeah. The operas that are set in Italy, I didn't even mention in the first round, but what's really interesting about them is that I think of operas like Tosca, which are not only set in Rome, but are like a tourist guidebook to important monuments in Italian history. Like they're not just set dressings, but they're fundamentally part of the story. They're like, they're the fertile soil. The history itself is part of the fertile soil from which these operas grew forth. And furthermore, to talk about 20th century composers in England that ignores composers like Luigi Nono, Luciano Berio, composers who maybe don't get heard or performed as much as the 20th century English or the older Italian composers, but that does not mean that they were not, out there still doing the work, still running the runs, still doing their drills. The Italian school of singing was so influential that England stole it and imported all of the singers from Italy because that's what people wanted to hear.
Ouch.
Every other national style of opera was really kind of created in opposition to Italian opera itself, because that was how they had to define themselves, as what they weren't, as opposed to what they were. Because this is just a juggernaut that will not be stopped. When people stop going to La Scala, then maybe London can be top dog. But I just don't see that happening today.
Matt Cummings making the case very strongly, finishing off the final. We go back to our judge and our guest on the show, Anthony Barrese.
I was really impressed with the Shakespeare argument until I remembered this was a discussion about opera. So
that is fair, I suppose.
Again, you went down the wrong alley with the contemporary Italian opera is my greatest love. So
wait, don't forget about the bribe I gave you.
Again, I just find this whole setup so unfair to everybody but Italy. So this is an easy shooting fish in the barrel.
Wow.
Italy.
Italy storms its way into the final and wins the Euro 2020 of opera.
The only thing that you could have brought up, I think, that would have really been a gut punch to Italy was the fact that they're notorious for not paying their singers. Even today, I mean, right before the pandemic, and even some of the best opera houses are just swimming in red. And that it is much more preferable for a lot of these people to sing, I think, in really any one of the other countries.
I think the real downfall was the failure to pay the referee, but each to their own.
That could be it too.
There we go. Well, we'll see how it plays out in reality.
Just let me note it that our judge's last name is Barese, and that is not a Polish last name.
There is a little bit of bias.
That would never fly. FIFA.
Yeah, that they don't do that in soccer, right? It's never...
The international
clean
sporting.
as can be.
England. So close, but Italy just too strong. Thanks again to our special guest, Maestro Anthony Barese, for picking a winner. To go backwards into 2021, in January, almost a year ago, we went inside the huddle with America's favorite baritone, Will Liverman, this Ryan Opera Center alum, and also the Met's first Black Papageno, would then be profiled in the February 2021 issue of Opera News, which was probably the first time one of our interview guests got that OBS bump before the episode even aired. Of course, Will Liverman had a great 2021. This is what he had to say with us inside the huddle.
When I first started singing, it was about just getting my name out there and just surviving and doing the auditions and competitions and but there came a time where it was just like, okay, I've started to get my career going, and it's more than that. And of course, I mean, being an opera singer is something that's, so meaningful for me to be able to, use my gift and share my gift on the stage and work with people and to create something special. And, opera's, amazing. It's what I love. But beyond that, it's, I started thinking what do I want to, leave behind? Do I want to just keep singing these roles and go from place to place, which is, amazing. I get to see a lot of new cities, but I want to use my platform for something else too. And, I got into opera because I saw some folks that were on stage that looked like me, like Lawrence Brownlee and Denise Graves, and folks like this that have paved the way so I can be on these stages. They really inspired me. So I wanted to also use my platform, to encourage other young artists of color and be an advocate for diversity, inclusion in the arts, and bring to light other Black composers as much as I can, and sing and perform their works. And so that's just sort of how over the years how that developed and how the album came about. I wanted to push this or make an album featuring all Black composers, because I think a lot of times, when we listen to Black composers or their music, it's always, and I love spirituals. Spirituals are my favorite because I grew up with a lot of gospel, and to me, spirituals sort of is that perfect link between classical singing and gospel, kind of all merge into one. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of times we put composers on platforms and recognizing their works with spirituals, but there are a lot of great composers that wrote a lot of great art songs. So I wanted to make an album specifically highlighting their contributions in art song. And it was a labor of love. It was something that I just reached out to Jim Ginsburg about my program idea and pitched it to him. And it was actually a connection through an album that I did I just was an appearance with Nicole Cabell and Allison Cambridge. They had a
Sisters in Song.
Yeah. And so I came on to do the Cozy Trio, and that's how I got linked up with CD Records.
Honorary sister.
Yeah, exactly. Honorary sister. And so that was, my introduction to them. And so that's, I pitched this project idea to Jim a few years ago, and
Jim Ginsburg, who's the CEO of CD record label here in Chicago. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. And he went for it. And then, from there we, just did the program, and we were able to record actually during COVID times safely. in Indiana, and then here we are
with your
Yeah.
collaborator Sean.
With so Paul Sanchez is the pianist,
Mhm.
and the album actually features a piece called Two Black Churches that I commissioned for Sean O'Pebolo. And going back, he's the guy who I got, myself, Sean, and Paul, we worked together on Sean's first album of Spiritual. So that's how I, got to be connected with him. And I really loved his writing. I really loved how he took those spirituals and made them like really his own, and the way he just brought them to life in a different way with his writing, specifically in the piano parts. So I really wanted to feature him in something that was meaningful to me, and to just telling a Black story about these girls, the Birmingham bombing, which is something that's so tragic, but then doing a parallel to the Charleston shooting to sort of show how Black people in America are still, after all this time, having to deal with the racism, and being for me growing up in the South, especially dealing with that myself, and being stereotyped, being having people look at me different. And so all those things, was the inspiration behind Two Black Churches. And that was a focal point. We just sort of built a program around that.
But
So
are you also playing on one of these tracks, the last
yeah,
one?
yeah. That was another source of inspiration. I was watching this documentary about the Birmingham bombing, and they played this song at the end called Birmingham Sunday. And I was like, oh, I gotta there's something about the song just really struck me. And I was playing around with it and did sort of my own arrangement. And so for the last, I think, song in the album, I'm playing and singing for myself this song Birmingham Sunday, which kind of just wraps up the whole album, and kind of touches on the bombing again, but also more generally, the song goes back to, and the choir kept singing of freedom, and to me that's sort of a central point of the album. So I was happy to be able to have that be included as well. It's a special piece.
Well, I'm a huge admirer of your sitting at the piano and singing, and it's actually very kind of aggravating to me that somebody is as talented as you. But like you have some of these videos that are available on your social media, some of which are very like authentic and sincere, and for lack of a better word, soulful. I don't know if you prefer a different word, but I'm just gonna say
yeah.
Okay. Can you talk about your training as a musician? I don't want to talk too much about like your necessarily education, but like how you come to sit at the piano and be able to sing like that, and to be able to be in front of a microphone, in front of a camera, which is something that we're all getting used to now during COVID. But it seems like you were comfortable with that, like maybe 7 years ago, you were already doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's for me, like with my background, I grew up with a big gospel background, and in the Pentecostal church basically means no sheet music, all ear, all off the cuff, all like, we don't know what. I mean, of course, choir, we have choir practice and all that, but like there are songs that we sing, but there's a lot of improv in church, and lots of people will just get up and sing a song and you just go with it. So I grew up in that sort of environment of just, going with the flow. And I learned how to play gospel music at a young age and listening to it early on. So that sort of gave me the improv ability, and, messing around on the piano in that way. And I also did take, music, classical piano as well. So kind of, being able to read a little bit, and also improv gave me that skill set for that. And yeah, I always, when I started out performing, I didn't have a lot of work actually. So I just spent my time, it's like, well, one of the things, I think about the greats and like how they leave behind their legacy, and what do they have? They have recordings, and people go to those, YouTube sites and listen to folks. It's just like, okay, well, I should just do, find some rep that I love, and record it, and just get it out there that kind of way. And sort of that way you sort of control when people type in your name and see what comes up, like the information and the things that people see. So I spent a lot of time, a few years ago, investing money in like project recordings, and I I did this competition where I did like a Deutsche Grammophon test recording, so have some of that all online, and that's all kind of how that got started. And I always make it a goal of mine every year to like keep just periodically putting out, you know, new videos, new art song things, and just like continuing to get that out there because it's so important these days, especially with COVID times.
Yeah, I mean, you're uniquely prepared to be a working musician in this time. If you had already experience with recording equipment and having the camera trained on you, and it's an entirely different topic. And I mean, I would love to talk about that with you because you are so good at social media. Maybe we'll get back to it, but no, I think that what you did before was always really engaging. I think there's a video of you crack open your score before the first day of rehearsal.
Oh God.
Maybe we'll link to it, or maybe we'll cut it. Actually, there's no rights on that. That's like, we can get your permission right here. We have permission to share that?
I mean, it's like a parody of another actual rap song, but there's
maybe we'll get flagged.
Yeah.
No, but that video particularly cracks me up because it's the way you hear people talking to each other sometimes like in the lounges of conservatories, you know, but it's not something that usually hear available to a wider audience. I don't know what has been some of the reaction you've been gotten from, you know, the organizations you work for and your colleagues about some of that stuff.
Oh, I think for a lot of people it's unexpected. I had started, you know, these funny, like silly videos just started out, I don't know, you're just bored and you just take a song and make it relatable and talk about things that people can relate to. And that's just sort of how it came up. And, you know, how we're always talking like, gosh, this person was so unprepared. They didn't know their music. Like, how long have they had this, you know, like, and so I just kind of took all that information and just made this sort of song that everyone always has that person in the cast. And I think, you know, people are always, you know, organizations are, you know, surprised, hopefully in a positive way, you know, when they see this type of material. And it also shows like the fun side too, you know, and then not to take things, you know, kind of just be light, you know, I kind of make that an important part of who I am, along with like all the very, you know, serious subject matter that's on my page, but also like, you know, I love The Office. I love to laugh. I love, you know, to just be genuine and joyful. So that's always the inspiration behind those types of things. Yeah. And I know one day I might be my own. I'm always worried that I'm going to be the victim of my own song one day when I have a gig and I just have like no time to prepare and I'm going to show up and then that song is just going to come back and bite me.
We know of very famous artists who show up to rehearsal and they have to have the music staff teach them their role, you know?
Yeah. Hello?
So when I begin to think about all of these pieces of your brand, for lack of a better word, your kind of identity, politics, and your social media presence, and even the very specific work that you do as a composer and as a musician, it all begins to feel like you are like, you want to be like this advocate teacher in the opera community. Can you think back about your own training? Did you have any experience? I know we talked briefly about the governor's school, where you felt that, like, I don't know, that passion for teaching, even if you're not like specifically going to be a teacher per se, but the idea of like that kind of sharing and feeling the passion about advocating for what we do as musicians.
Yeah, I think probably hit me. It's probably in my DNA a little bit because my dad was a teacher. He was a elementary school teacher, and a lot of that I think rubbed off on me. I don't think I knew I had it really at the beginning when I was focusing mainly on performing, but especially now during this pandemic, you know, we're all sitting around. I've had a lot of time to really work with the Governor's School for the Arts, is where I went to high school and worked and did some master classes
with Ryan Speedo Green and Frederick Ballantyne.
we all were there at the same time. Yeah, it's crazy. This little school in Norfolk, Virginia, and it really just sort of dawned on me that, you know, even before then, you know, as I was going throughout my career, realizing the importance of being an advocate and using your platform to help, you know, continuing all together to forge a path forward in terms of, you know, inclusion and diversity, not just on the stage, but, you know, in administration as well, and really making the, you know, we're making these statements, but what are we doing actually to make that change that we want to see in this field? Because there's lots of potential. There's so many great minds and great talent out there. We have everything. It's just like, what are we doing to make this go forward? And that's like a big part of my mission, is encouraging and helping people as I, you know, as best as I can, who are behind me, and you know, telling them about my story, and you know, encouraging them to you know, speak up and use their voice and be comfortable in their skin, because it's, you know, it's what I was trained, you know, by my high school teacher, Robert Brown, instilled that in me, and he was, you know, he's like a musical father to all of us. He passed away sadly in 2008, I think. But you know, Ryan Speedo Green, Freddie will tell you, I mean, it's in his book, actually, in Ryan's book, that, you know, Mr. Robert Brown was, you know, a major influence, because he, you know, he's a 6'4" Black man. We loved about him. I mean, he was like super funny, but also would come down with like the hammer of justice if you didn't have that music learned. Like, that's where we learned that, like, that discipline.
Yeah.
And to
crack
see
open your score before the first day of rehearsal.
Look, you can mess around and not have that music learned if you want. You're going to be put on full blast. Like, Brown didn't care who it was.
Were you at that performance of Carmen that Ryan talks about, where he met Denise Graves backstage?
I think that may have been a year before me, or
Okay.
it could have been maybe my freshman year. But like, you know, we would always take trips to Governor School, to the Met, and yeah, I mean, that's, for me as well. That's where I really had a thought, like, man, this is a really cool art form. I mean, I was just amazed at how, I mean, we were sitting in the nosebleeds, and we could hear those singers without microphones, just as clear as day up there. I'm like, how are they doing this? How are they making this sound? I mean, it's just something so unnatural and so different and so otherworldly that was like, it's cool.
But at that time, whatever this was in the early aughts, or in the
gosh, 2000s.
in the late 90s, maybe. Yeah. Did you also, as a high school student, understand that you were a minority in the audience, not just on stage?
You know what? It's weird. I had kind of a reverse thing happen, because Governor School was super diverse, and there were a lot of Black singers, opera singers, in that program, because we're all from the area. And Governor School is a huge advocate for, I mean, it was just one of the most diverse schools in dance. I mean, we have the, you know, Adrienne Warren, who's Tina, and Tina Turner went to Governor School. And lots of folks that so I was just like, growing up, I was always surrounded by
people of color.
People of color that were
Same
super
experience
talented.
until I went to college.
Until I went to college, exactly. So like, it started off like, whoa, this is what it's like, and then it was like, oh wait, it's not really like. So I had like the reverse experience of really getting that at an early age and thinking this is the norm, but then going out there, the further you go up, you realize like, oh, it's kind of not as diverse as I thought.
Wider and wider the higher I go.
yeah. Start off like all your family and friends and parents are all at the concerts, and it's like super fun, and like, you know, people are really into it. And then like over time, it was like, okay, it's just it was interesting to think about that.
Good call, bad call on Opera Box Score.
All right, that is it for this week's show. We got a good call and a bad call. My TV list is very, very long right now, and though it has nothing to do with opera, I did watch the first episode of Station 11 on HBO Max. Nothing to do with opera, but so beautifully filmed. I have not read the book. I don't really read books, but wow, I cannot wait to see how that TV show plays out. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk Radio Show about opera. Our announcer's Norm Waddell. He's at normwaddell.com. On Facebook, search for Opera Box Score. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at Opera Box Score. Please help us deepen that bench of listeners by liking and sharing our social media posts. Email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Drop us a line and get that OBS beer coaster. Get that OBS lapel pin just for sharing your own hot take. As the year draws to a close, you can even make a donation to Opera Box Score. That's operaboxscore.com/donate. Even $20 help us continue to produce our show. And of course, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast on Stitcher. Just slam the favorite button on Apple Podcasts. And in the new year, the OBS is coming to you on more platforms. We're going to share details on that. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For your co-hosts, Matt Cummings and Ashley Hardgrave, I'm George Cedarquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you ring in the new year, whatever time zone you are in. I still don't quite understand the international dateline. We're back with an all-new show next week when we look at the most memorable stories from Operaland in 2021. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more, shh, not so loud, hangovers. Join us